All right, well, welcome back. Today is day 5 in the Holy Week Devotional journey that we are taking. It just so happens that day 5 is also known as Maundy Thursday. It's not always, in some Presbyterian churches, there's some special service around this. Usually you find it more in Catholic and Anglican, High Anglican traditions, but really it is the day to celebrate the Lord's Supper. This is the recalling of when Jesus gathered around the table with his disciples, sharing that last meal together before Jesus was to be arrested and all the events that happened after that. And so I thought what we would do today is take a look at that very account, but from John's perspective. And what we'll realize is that John has a very different take than the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. See, they all have the Last Supper, but John takes some time to recognize that his original audience likely would have been immersed in the telling of this. They would have known this event really quite well. And so John tells the same story, but slightly different. It takes place after they have already eaten, and the imagery that John uses still conveys the exact same message, and in fact foreshadows and points toward the events that are coming up the following day. And so we're looking at John chapter 13, verses 1 through 17. So if you want to turn to that and if you want to pause the video and take a quick read through that, I'm just going to be pulling out a few verses that we're going to be focusing on. And the first verse that we're going to look at is verse 3. Verse 3 says this: Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin, and he began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Now, we think that this is just an excellent example of servanthood, that you've probably heard sermons that Jesus was taking on the very role that was dedicated to slaves, of washing of people's feet was always customary to do at the start of a meal. And typically this was the job of the household slave, who would come and wash the feet of all the guests who were coming over. And so Jesus takes that role upon himself. This is a way of leading, and some have drawn on this very image for servant leadership. But what's going on, what John is drawing our attention to, is actually even deeper than that. This is what N.T. Wright has to say about these verses. He says, "The Word who was with God, the Word who was God, became flesh. He laid aside the clothes of glory and put on our human nature in order to wash our feet." The Word that was with God and was God took off the clothes of glory and wrapped up the towel of humanity upon himself so that he might wash our feet. The foot washing scene in John, which, as I said before, replaces the Lord's Supper in this particular gospel account. It isn't just a nice moment where Jesus washes his disciples' feet. In fact, it points beyond itself to the crucifixion, that this was the reason Jesus came. This was Jesus' way of showing us who God is. And so the foot washing points us toward the cross. And so this adds more significance to what the dialogue between Jesus and Peter have. And so Jesus comes to Simon Peter, and Peter says, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" And Jesus says, "You do not realize it now, what I am doing, but later you will understand." And Peter says, "No, Lord, you will never wash my feet. You can never wash my feet." And Jesus said, "Unless I wash your feet, you have no part in me." Jesus must wash his disciples' feet. Jesus must wash our feet. And so Peter, responding the way that he always does, just jumping full in without fully thinking things through, and he says, "Okay, Lord, fine, wash my feet. In fact, give me an entire bath. Wash my head, wash my hands, wash everything." And Jesus says, "You don't need to have a bath. If you've already had a bath, it's just your feet that need to be washed." Jesus graciously replies, "Those who have had a bath need only wash their feet. Their body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you." John points out that he was talking about Judas at this point. But what what Jesus is getting at here. In chapter 15, verse 3 of John, it says that Jesus has already washed us by calling us. He's called us to himself. And so the only parts of our lives that need washing are the dirty parts, the parts that get covered in the dust of life, the parts that get grimed up as they live within the tension between the world as it is and the world that is to come. And N.T. Wright says, what we need day by day is the regular washing of those parts, our personalities and our bodies, which get dusty and dirty. And so Jesus says that he must wash our feet if we are to belong to him. He must serve us in this way. And so in this passage, we actually have a very deep connection with Philippians 2. And in Philippians 2, Paul writes to the Philippian church about the mindset of Christ, that being very nature God did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage, but instead he took upon the nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. That is, the foot washing scene is that very moment being played out. It is the moment of Jesus' life. It is the moment of Jesus on the cross. That though he is very much God, he put away the clothes of glory, and instead he clothed himself with our humanity so that he might serve humanity, and that he might serve them in such a way that they would be freed from the bondage in which they find themselves in, that we would be freed from sin. That is what this foot washing scene is pointing us toward. It is a physical parable of what is coming up on Good Friday. It is a parable about the cross. That Jesus took upon humanity so that he might die as a human and die to the sin caused by humanity in order to free the rest of humanity from that sin. And so today we are learning about how Jesus serves and how we might serve as Jesus served. And so just like Jesus, the church is called to do this as well. The church is called to look away from itself and look toward the world that it is called to serve. It is a call to take off the church clothes and be able to wrap that cloth, that towel of servanthood around ourselves and look at the world that we often try and distance ourselves from, the ones we try and ignore, the ones we try and argue against. And instead of arguing, we are to bend down and to wash the world's feet. We are to wash the feet of those who would look at us and wonder why on earth would these people even want to attend church. It is a very intimate moment and a very tender moment to have to actually wash someone's feet. I remember back in college, we had this as part of our class, was we had to lead, our classmates would lead a worship service in the during the class time. And one of the groups had the class pair up and we had to wash our partner's feet and had to let them wash our feet. And I can tell you, as a Presbyterian, that was a really uncomfortable moment for me. This is not something we've typically done in our tradition, at least not in my experience. It's not what I've been raised in and done, but it was a very humbling and powerful moment. And afterwards, some of my classmates were sharing of their experiences, and they drew on some of the foot washing services that they had been in. And I remember this one girl was sharing how she was attending a foot washing service the year before, and there was an 80-year-old grandmother in the church who was sitting right beside her during this service, and she realized as they started that this 80-year-old woman was going to have to bend down and wash her feet, and she felt so embarrassed and so mortified that this 80-year-old woman would have to get down on the floor in order to wash her feet. And yet this woman ended up doing it. When this girl said, no, it's okay, you don't need to do this, and she stopped her and said, no, Jesus did this. I want to do this. And so the 80-year-old grandmother got down on her hands and knees and began to wash this girl's feet, and tears were just flowing down both of their faces. It is a humbling moment. If we think about it, we might think, I don't think I could do that. That's just a little too out there for me. And yet this is the very thing that Jesus says he needs to do if we want to be part of him and part of who he is. This is something we need to allow him to do, to allow his church to do, to serve in this way. And so today, as you think about Easter, as you think about what is coming up tomorrow and then on Sunday, I'd love for you to think about how Jesus has served. How by being very nature God, he did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage, but instead became a servant. He put away the clothes of glory in order to clothe himself in humanity so that he might serve. It didn't matter what his status was. It didn't matter if he was in the right. Jesus got down, became human, and he served so that humanity could be free. This was the radical love of Jesus, and it is the radical love that the church is called to demonstrate to the world. And so as you think about that today, as you meditate on that, ask Jesus to not only show you in the ways in which he has served you, but also in the opportunities, the ways in which you can die to yourself, that you can put away the clothes of glory and become a servant to those in the world. God bless you. Have a wonderful day.